Some labor groups are expressing concern over Biden's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. President of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, was asked about that move on Axios.
In his first hours as president, Joe Biden announced that he was going to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. And the Labourers International Union of North America put out a statement saying that it's going to cost 1,000 union jobs. Can you explain why the president was right?
Well, I wish he hadn't done that on the first day, because the Labourers International was right. It did and will cost us jobs in the process. I wish he had paired that more carefully with the thing that he did second by saying, here's where we're creating jobs. We can do mine reclamation, we can fix leaks, and we can fix seeps and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in doing all of that stuff.
Interesting. And then when White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, she was pressed on the administration's plans for what people who should do who lost their jobs, is what she had to say.
When is it that the Biden administration is going to let the thousands of fossil fuel industry workers, whether it's pipeline workers or construction workers, who are either out of work or will soon be out of work because of a Biden EO, when it is and where it is that they can go for their green job? And that is something the administration has promised. There is now a gap. So I'm just curious when that happens, when those people can count on that.
Well, I'd certainly welcome you to present your data of all the thousands and thousands of people who won't be getting a green job. Maybe next time you're here, you can present that.
So Democratic strategist, owner of JC Strategies, Jennifer Holsworth-Karp, and Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard. They join us now to discuss the Biden executive order. Jen, let me start with you. Interesting criticism there from Richard Trumka, and as well down in New Mexico, where I know this was also an issue that rankled some of the people who lost their job as a result of that. What do you make of this as a political situation and the choice in order to cancel Keystone XL pipeline?
First and foremost, it was absolutely the right thing to do. Also, I think that Trumka's statement got truncated both by Ducey when he asked Jen Psaki the question, but also just the entirety of the interview shows that ultimately he supports the decision that the president was making. He wanted him to present it in a different way and make sure that all of the information was out there. The question was in incredibly bad faith. Thousands of workers are not going to lose their jobs. It's actually going to be somewhere under 1,000 with this first move. But Richard Trumka went on to say in the interview that he wanted the president to present it with the information of the green jobs that the workers were going to get. We do need to acknowledge as an administration and as a party that there is a push and pull between our support for unions, our support for workers, our support for organization rights, and the environment. This has been a struggle in the Democratic Party for a while, and I think you see it coming to a head here. President Biden has a very specific plan to make sure that those workers do get jobs when they're removed based on these executive orders. I think one of the problems we're going to need to confront is how many of those jobs are permanent and how many of those jobs are short-term. So that's the conversation we should be having. I don't think this gotcha exchanged in the press briefing room is what the country should really be focused on.
I mean, Rachel, I'm actually sympathetic to Trumka's comments here. I think the critique is fair in that we've heard a lot from Democratic administrations about, don't worry, we're going to retrain you to code, and none of those things ever seem to come to fruition. So I totally understand if there's like a lack of confidence that those jobs are also going to come through. On the other hand, the attacks from the right here are in total bad faith. I mean, look, there are somewhere around 3,900 temporary construction jobs on the pipeline. The number of permanent jobs that we're talking about here is 50. The real reason they object to this is because they take a lot of money from the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, this is the climate edition of Learn to Code in some respects, I think. But what was most interesting to me about this was the timing here, because it sort of goes against everything that Joe Biden has styled himself to be for the last 20, 30 years, which is friend of the working class, union class jobs, Joe Biden. His relationship with the state of Pennsylvania was always extremely important to the brand of Joe Biden. And so, whether jobs, there will be jobs lost. The amount is probably less, right, than is being in talked about, I think, in right-wing circles. But jobs still will be lost. And I think to go after union jobs on your first day,
50 permanent jobs. We're talking about 50 jobs.
Sure, but But I think it's it goes against, I think, who Joe Biden has presented himself to be. And that's really interesting to me because I think broadly speaking, it tells me the Democrat Party is sort of walking away from the white working class who is represented a lot in those union jobs. There's conversations happening in rooms around Washington, to say, well, we can't talk to the white working class for ideological reasons, and this is sort of maybe the first representation of that. So to me, the number of jobs is a little bit less.
I just want to push you, though, on the right-wing perspective here. It's not like Ted Cruz is standing up for the working class. Ted Cruz is standing up for the oil and gas industry. That's the bottom line. I mean, let's just be fair about what his motivation is here. He doesn't care about these 50 jobs.
Well, that's a fair critique. What's interesting here for the right is this is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity for them to say, look, we actually have a plan for union jobs. We have a plan to say, if you're a union voter, you should vote Republican. We have no plan for that, but we have an opportunity that we will probably win.
No, that's very true. Jen, this is something I remember when I think it was the first or second debate in which Biden was asked a question by Tim Alberta around whether millions of blue-collar jobs would have to be sacrificed in order for green regulation. And he affirmatively replied yes. And I remember being like, oh, man, they're going to hang him with that in Pennsylvania. Of course, Trump campaign turned out to be much more incompetent than even I thought was possible at the time. But it is, I think this is more of a cultural touchstone thing than it is of anything else. Just talk about like you were saying, the balance and the need in order to convey this, because like Crystal said, there's a deep and I think very trusted basically skepticism that, the learning to code or the retraining or anything is coming on the other side of this.
Well, a couple things here to unpack. First, I refuse to participate in a conversation that suggests that white working class voters are not going to be subject to the consequences of what happens to our planet, right? So first and foremost, we need to make sure that white working class voters understand that they're a part of this ecological disaster that is occurring in front of our eyes. And I think that that's something that President Biden did very good on the trail. And by the way, he was pressed in the correct way by the entirety of the progressive community to say, hey, we know that you're Joe Biden, working class guy from Pennsylvania who wants to represent the workers, but you have to see the forest for the trees. Here is what you are missing about the steps that we need to take in terms of the environment. He promised them that he would listen, and he's listening, and he's acting. So this is actually a promise made, a promise kept in terms of how he's going to treat the environment and balance that with workers going into the next 4 years of his administration.
And
Last,
part of what I think this whole debate underscores for me or highlights for me is how wrong-headed some of the centrist attacks on the Green New Deal were, because the best innovation of the Green New Deal was directly tying these things together so that you don't have this situation that Trumka's worried about of like, okay, we see the job loss, but the new jobs that are supposedly coming are far less tangible. And in fact, I really went through the Biden climate executive orders to see what was what. They have this really exciting, good idea of a new CCC, a civilian climate corps. But there's no specifics around it. There's no budgetary allocation. It's like, we're going to study how to do this. No amount of jobs is specified, no specific dollar amount, none of that. And so I actually think centrists, by attacking the Green New Deal, have left themselves open to this attack when it was really a beneficial framing to have these two things directly tied together.
Yeah, I think what it was number one, classic misinformation campaign on the right, which we buckle to. I think one of the things that the Democratic Party gets wrong all the time is we allow the Republicans and the conservatives to frame the debate, and then we respond to it. And so my constant argument, even though I'm always called, centrist, moderate, establishment, all of the other pejorative terms that you want to call a Democrat who's not in lockstep, my problem has always been the communication of the policies, not the policies themselves. I think if you go into an election guns blazing on a policy that isn't quite understood. And by the way, that's because the Democratic Party has not spent the time, organization, or money in order to explain it to voters. That's on us. We have not spent the time explaining it because we're too busy modeling and hyper-targeting our voters for turnout, right? So then when the Republicans do define an issue, we are forced to respond based on that definition. I think you see that receding now with the Biden administration, and I give them a lot of credit for that communication.
Rachel, I want your quick response to that before we go.
I think it's right that, I think if you're going to make a policy change that results in some job loss, even if it's only 50, you have to show people that there's new jobs on the horizon. So tying that together, I think it's probably a lesson for both parties. But I think broadly speaking, going back to sort of my perspective from the right, I think the Keystone Pipeline, and I've said this for years, is the most blinding, shiny object in Washington. I don't know why both parties are so obsessed with it, but I think it represents like so much about, they just use it as a proxy for everything else. So I think the energy around it should calm down, because at the end of the day, there's a lot bigger issues to talk about than Keystone.
That's true. They got great lobbyists, I can tell you that.
There's even more pipelines out there, too, by the way.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you. And
Thanks,
stick
guys.
with us. More with Team Rising right after this.